used to work the night shift at a small convenience store just outside of town. It wasn't a great job, but it paid the bills, and since I wasn't much of a people person, I didn't mind the quiet. Nights, most of the time it was just me, a radio playing softly in the background, and the occasional late-night customer. The store was open 24 hours, but after midnight things got slow, real slow. I had my routine down. Restock shelves, clean up the floors, do inventory, and stare at the clock until morning. But one night something happened that still keeps me awake to this day. The store was in a lonely part of town, sitting right off a highway, surrounded by miles of empty road to the west and thick woods to the east. We had a few regulars, mostly truckers stopping in for gas and snacks, but every now and then someone strange would wander in. The kind of people you don't ask too many questions about. It was around 2 a.m. when I noticed the man standing by the gas pumps. At first I thought he was filling up, but there was no car, just him standing there, under the flickering overhead lights, wearing a heavy coat with the hood pulled up. Even though it was the middle of summer, he wasn't moving, just standing completely still, facing the store. The security cameras were old and grainy, but even through the static-filled screen, I could see something was off about him, something about the way he stood, his shoulders too stiff, his head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something. I watched him for a few minutes, expecting him to either come inside or leave, but he didn't move, not an inch. I was starting to get that prickling sensation on the back of my neck when the door chime suddenly went off, making me jump a little. A woman had walked in. She looked normal enough, mid-30s, long dark hair, wearing a jacket over a floral dress, but her eyes, something about them seemed empty, hollow. She didn't acknowledge me, didn't even glance in my direction. She just walked slowly to the back of the store where the refrigerators were. I watched as she opened one of the doors, pulled out a single bottle of water, and then just stood there with the door open, staring into the glass. Something about the way she moved made my stomach twist tight, like I was watching someone pretend to be human, but not quite getting it right. The chime rang again, and another person walked in, this time a man, maybe in his 50s. Bald with a thin mustache, he moved just like the woman, slow, deliberate, and without looking at me. He made his way down the snack aisle and stopped midway, just standing there staring at the shelves, but not reaching for anything. My unease was quickly turning into full-blown anxiety. The store was small, but at that moment it felt massive, like the walls were stretching further away. I glanced at the cameras again. The man outside was still there, same position, same eerie stillness, except now, I swear, his head was tilted just a bit more, his face still hidden by the hood. I cleared my throat, trying to shake the tension, and called out to the woman in the back, "Ma'am, do you need help?" No response. She didn't even flinch. The man in the snack aisle still hadn't moved. My heart was pounding now. Something was seriously wrong. I reached under the counter, where we kept a wooden bat just in case. My hand wrapped around the handle, just as the chime went off again. 2 more people entered, both men, both moving with the same unnerving slowness. One of them had a long grey beard. His clothes looked tattered, dirty, like he'd been living in the woods for years. The other was younger, maybe early 20s, but his eyes looked sunken, hollow, like he hadn't slept in weeks. They each went to separate aisles and stood motionless at the store. Was completely silent now, except for the hum of the refrigerators. My pulse was in my throat. I knew I needed to do something. I took a deep breath and forced myself to speak again. "Can I help you all with something?" Nothing. No one even looked at me. They just stood there, their bodies eerily still, except for the slight rising and falling of their chests. Then, as if in perfect synchronization, they all turned their heads toward me at once. Not their bodies, just their heads, twisting at an unnatural angle. I heard something pop, like a joint being forced beyond its limit. I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of gum packs on the counter. My breath coming in short gasps. I grabbed the bat, pulling it free from under the counter, and held it tight. They weren't moving anymore, just watching me. Their faces were blank. No emotion, no recognition, just empty stares. Then the lights flickered, and for a split second, everything went dark. When they came back on, the man outside was gone. The space where he had been standing empty. My stomach dropped. I frantically checked the cameras, scanning every screen for him. But he wasn't there, not at the pumps, not on the road, just gone. I looked back up, and the people inside were gone to every aisle, empty. The refrigerators closed, the entire store silent, like they had never been there at all. But I knew better. The unease didn't leave me. The air still felt thick, like something was watching. Waiting, I forced myself to step out from behind the counter, gripping the bat so hard. My knuckles ached. I walked the aisles, my breath shaky, scanning every shelf, every corner. But they were truly gone. The only thing left was the bottle of water still sitting on the floor by the refrigerator's lid off, water spilled in a perfect circle around it. I locked the doors after that. I didn't care about the 24-hour policy. I put the close sign up and sat behind the counter, gripping that bat until sunrise. When my manager came in for the morning shift, I tried to explain to him what happened, but I could tell he didn't believe me. He kept saying maybe I was just tired, maybe they were just weirdos playing a prank. But I know what I saw. That was my last shift there. I quit that same day. I don't know who or what they were, but sometimes at night when I pass by that old store, I swear I see someone standing by the pumps, a shadowy figure who'd pulled up, head tilted ever so slightly, like he's still watching, waiting. I used to work the night shift at a 24-hour diner in a quiet town that never had much going on. It was the kind of place where people came in half asleep, looking for coffee and eggs before work or a quick meal after a long drive. I actually liked it for the most part. It was peaceful, usually just a few truckers or late-night travelers stopping in to stretch their legs and grab a bite. But every once in a while, I'd get some weirdo walking in off the highway, making my stomach churn. This happened last summer, a night so humid, the air felt thick enough to choke on. It was a slow shift, just me, a cook in the back, and one other waitress, Jenny, who was supposed to clock out around 2 a.m. We had a couple truckers at the counter, and an old man nursing a cup of coffee in the corner, but the place was dead. Silent apart from the quiet hum of the jukebox playing some old country song. It was around 1:30 when the bell above the door jingled and I turned to see a man step inside. Something about him made my skin crawl. Immediately, he was tall, gaunt, wearing a wrinkled suit that was about 2 sizes too big for him. His skin was pale, almost sickly looking, and his dark, sunken eyes were locked onto me like he already knew who I was. The way he moved was wrong, too stiff, deliberate, like he had to remind himself how to walk, each step placed too carefully. I forced a polite smile as he slid into one of the booths in the farthest corner, his eyes never leaving me. Jenny leaned in close as I grabbed a menu from behind the counter. That dude creeps me out, she whispered, and I nodded in agreement. Something about him just felt off. I walked over, forcing myself to act normal. "What can I get you tonight?" I asked, my voice coming out more uneasy than I wanted it. The man didn't respond at first, just sat there staring up at me. His lips barely parted. Then, without breaking eye contact, he said, "Do you believe in ghosts, Ethan?" My stomach dropped. He shouldn't have known my name. I hadn't introduced myself, and I wasn't wearing a name tag. I tried to keep my composure. "Sir, do you want something to eat?" He tilted his head just slightly and grinned. But it wasn't a normal grin. It was too wide, too forced, like he was trying to mimic human expression. "No food, just coffee, black." I nodded quickly and turned on my heel, practically rushing back behind the counter. My hands shook as I poured his coffee. I could feel his eyes on me, even from across the room. Jenny came up beside me. Okay, seriously, what the hell is his deal? She muttered. I shook my head. I don't know, but he knew my name. Her face paled, and she peered over at him. He hadn't moved, still sitting rigidly in the booth. His eyes locked onto us. Just bring him the coffee, and let's hope he leaves soon, she said. I walked back over, setting the cup down in front of him. He didn't say thank you, didn't even blink. Just slowly reached for the cup, his fingers long and bony, gripping it too tightly. Then he said it, again. Do you believe in ghosts, Ethan? This time I forced myself to meet his eyes, sir. Is there something I can help you with? The grin on his face widened. He leaned in just slightly. There's something in the back room. I felt ice crawl up my spine. Excuse me. He slowly turned his head toward the swinging door leading to the storage area. His expression blank. It's watching you right now. That was enough. I turned away from him, walking straight to the back, where our cook Frank was leaning against the counter, chewing on a toothpick. Hey, Frank, can you go out there for a minute? See if that guy needs anything else, I said. Trying to keep my voice steady, Frank raised a brow. Why? What's up? I hesitated, then said, he's just weirding me out a bit. Frank sighed but nodded. Yeah, all right, give me a sec. As he walked out, I took a deep breath, trying to shake the uncomfortable feeling crawling under my skin. But then I heard it, a faint scraping sound coming from the storage room. I turned slowly toward the door, heart pounding against my ribs. The light flickered slightly, casting strange, shifting shadows across the floor. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then the scraping came again, louder. This time my breath caught. I forced myself to step forward, reaching for the handle. But just before my fingers touched the wood, something slammed against the other side, hard enough to rattle the doorframe. I stumbled back, my heart leaping into my throat. My first instinct was to run. But then I heard Jenny scream from the front of the diner. I sprinted out, just in time to see the man in the suit standing inches from her, his long fingers resting lightly on the counter. His face was too close to invasive. Leave her alone, I shouted, but he didn't react. He just stood there, perfectly still, staring at Jenny with that same wide, unnatural grin. Frank stormed over, grabbing him by the shoulder. All right, buddy, you need to get the hell out. The second Frank touched him, the man's expression shifted. His smile dropped, his face going blank, his body jerked slightly, like he wasn't used to being touched. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the door. The bell jingled as he stepped outside, disappearing into the thick night. We all stood there in stunned silence. Jenny was shaking her hands, clutching her arms tightly. He whispered something to me. Before you came out, she finally said, voice unsteady. He said, don't go into the back room. I felt my stomach tighten. I looked toward the storage door, still slightly ajar, the fluorescent light inside flickering unevenly. Someone should check, Frank muttered, but none of us moved. Eventually Frank took a breath. Fine, I'll do it. He grabbed a heavy flashlight from under the counter and pushed the door open. Disappearing inside the room was silent for a long moment. Then what the hell? Frank's voice rang out, sharp and confused. I rushed in behind him, and my blood ran cold. The back room was a mess. Shelves, knocked over boxes spilled onto the floor. But that wasn't the worst part. In the middle of the room, directly beneath the flickering light, was a pile of old dirty clothes, and tangled within the fabric was a single worn leather shoe. Frank knelt down, picking it up, examining it with a frown. Jesus, this thing is ancient, he muttered. The fabric was thin, discolored, like it had been sitting there for decades. But that was impossible. We had just cleaned this room a few days ago. I backed away, my heart pounding. Let's just go, let's just lock it up. Frank nodded, and we quickly stepped back out, locking the door behind us. When we got back to the front, Jenny was staring out the diner window, her face pale. He's still out there. Me and Frank exchanged looks before stepping up to the window. The parking lot was empty at first, nothing but asphalt glowing under the neon lights. But then I saw movement just beyond the trees, a figure standing. There just on the edge of the darkness, the man in the suit, watching, waiting. That was my last shift at the diner. I quit the next day. I don't know what he was or how he knew my name, but I still see him sometimes in my dreams, in the reflections of windows. When I'm not looking directly, I'll catch a glimpse of that too wide smile and those dark, empty eyes, waiting, just waiting. I used to work the night shift at a small gas station off a nearly abandoned stretch of highway. I say used to because after what happened to me one night, I quit and never looked back. The station itself was old, run down, the kind of place truckers stopped at when they had no other option, and sometimes even they passed it up. The flickering neon sign barely cast any light, and the lot was always eerily silent except for the occasional hum of a passing car. It was a Tuesday night cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and making the old metal roof groan. It was just past 2 a.m. and the store was dead silent. The only sounds were the buzzing of the overhead fluorescent lights and the hum of the refrigerators in the back. I had done my usual rounds, stocking the shelves, wiping down the counters, making sure everything was in place. Then the bell above the door chimed. I looked up expecting to see a trucker or some lost traveler, but the man who walked in didn't fit either description. He was tall, gaunt, his skin was pale, almost grey, and he wore an old hoodie pulled tight over his head. He didn't look at me, just walked straight to the back of the store. His movements were strange, almost jerky, like he was forcing himself to move. I watched him for a moment, then called out, "Need any help, sir?" He didn't answer. My gut told me something was off about him, but I tried to brush it off. People came in at odd hours all the time. Some of them were just weird. I busied myself, pretending to clean the counter while keeping an eye on him. He stood in the back aisle, facing away from me, just standing there, staring at the rows of snacks. But he wasn't moving, wasn't reaching for anything, just standing still. It was unsettling. After a few minutes, I cleared my throat louder this time. "Excuse me, sir, do you need help?" Slowly, he turned his head toward me, not his body, just his head. His eyes were too wide, too dark. The kind of eyes that felt empty of anything human. Then he grinned, not a friendly smile, not even a smirk. Just teeth, lots of them yellowed and uneven. His lips stretched too far. His skin looked like it barely fit over his face. My stomach twisted. Something primal in me screamed to run, but I was frozen. He didn't speak, just turned back to the shelves, grabbed a single bag of chips, and walked toward the counter. When he placed the bag down, I hesitated. His hand was wrong, 2 long fingers, bony knuckles, jutting out like he had to. Many joints, the nails were yellow, cracked. I swallowed hard and rang him up. My hands were shaking as I told him the total. He reached into his hoodie, pulled out a few crumpled bills and coins and dropped them onto the counter. His fingers brushed mine cold to cold, like he had been standing outside in the freezing wind for hours. He took the bag, turned, and walked out the door. The bell chimed again, and then he was gone. I let out a shaky breath, told myself I was overreacting. But then I looked down at the money in my hand, and my blood ran cold. The bills were old, too old, the kind that hadn't been in circulation for decades. The coins were worse, rusted, corroded like they had been buried for years. I dropped them on the counter, my hands trembling. I told myself to stop being stupid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Then I heard it, a scraping noise. Outside near the pumps, I turned to look, and there he was, standing by the pump, not moving, just staring at me through the glass. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I knew. He was grinning, that horrible, too wide grin. The wind howled around him, but he didn't move, just stood there staring. I reached for my phone to call the cops, But before I could move, the power went out. Everything plunged into darkness. The humming of the refrigerators stopped, the buzzing of the lights silenced. The only thing left was the sound of the wind and the distant hum of a passing car. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicked it on, and shined it toward the window. He was gone. I stood there, heart pounding. The only light in the entire store was the weak glow of my flashlight. I tried to tell myself it was just a power outage. Nothing more, but my gut knew better. I needed to leave. I reached for my keys, but then the bell above the door chimed again. I swung my flashlight toward the entrance. The door was open, but no one was there. The cold wind blew inside, rattling the shelves. I took a step back, my mind racing. Then I heard it, a whisper right behind me, not words, just a sound, breathy, hollow. I spun around, my flashlight beam shaking wildly, but there was no one there. The aisles were empty, the store silent except for the wind. But I could feel someone standing just behind me, breathing down my neck. My skin crawled. I bolted toward the back office, slammed the door shut, locked it. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, dialed 911. But as soon as I hit call, the screen went black, battery dead. Even though it had been at 80 just minutes ago. Then the whispering started again, louder, closer. It wasn't just one voice, it was many overlapping murmurs, growing more frantic. I backed away, pressing myself against the far wall. My flashlight flickered and then died, plunging me into complete darkness. I squeezed my eyes shut, breathing hard, then silence, nothing but the pounding of my heart. And then the door handle rattled slowly at first, then harder, shaking, like someone was trying to force it open. I held my breath, waiting for it to stop, waiting for the nightmare to end. Then suddenly, everything went still. The rattling stopped, the whispering stopped, even the wind outside seemed to die down. I stood there, frozen, listening, waiting, after what felt like hours. I finally reached for the flashlight, turned it back on, dim, weak, but still working. I shined it at the door, half expecting to see something standing there. But there was nothing, just an empty room. Cautiously, I unlocked the door, pushed it open. The store was normal, the lights were back on the refrigerators, humming again like nothing had happened. I stepped out, heart hammering, my chest still tight. I looked toward the front window and froze. The bag of chips was still sitting on the counter, untouched. The crumpled old bills still there, as if he had never left. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, ran to my car, locked the doors, and sped out of their tires. Screeching against the pavement, I never went back to that gas station, never even drove past it again. I quit the next morning, over the phone, told my manager I was done. No explanation, no 2 weeks notice, just done. A few months later, I worked up the nerve to ask around about the place, about whether anyone had seen that man before. But no one had. Some people even said that station had been closed for years, which didn't make any sense because I had worked there. And yet, when I drove by it months later, just to be sure, the place was boarded up, abandoned, like it hadn't been open in a long, long time. Whatever happened that night, whatever I saw or heard, I don't know. If it was real or if I was just losing my mind, all I know is that I never want to find out.